I used to love going to amusement parks as a kid. My favorite one was called Wonderwood Park. It had an Alice in Wonderland theme that was just different enough from the House of Mouse's version to not get sued. Since it was close to where I lived, every summer I'd go there with my parents as an annual tradition. Those days gave me some of the happiest memories of my life. They couldn't last though. My father got a job far away from our old town, and we all had to move with him. It became impractical to travel to Wonderwood Park every year, so we eventually just stopped going. I was just about to graduate high school when my mother told me that she heard the park closed down due to unknown reasons. I remember feeling sad when I heard the news, but I was too busy with things like finals and college applications to be too down about it. It was only after I'd graduated college and moved out of my parents' house that I decided to return to my old hometown once more to revisit Wonderwood Park. I pulled over to the nearest hotel and rented a room there before proceeding to where Wonderwood Park once was on foot, wearing a medical mask to cover my face. I doubted anyone actually cared whether people went to those ruins or not, but I was still technically trespassing. It was better if nobody saw me there, and for them to not see my face if they did. Late that afternoon, I hopped over the fence, past the locked gates, and into Wonderwood Park for the first time since I was 12. As expected, a lot has changed since my last time there, but I was still able to recognize it as the place that made my childhood. The rides I had once waited in humongous lines to get on lay rusty and dilapidated from years of neglect. The food stands had completely collapsed, ravaged by the elements and scavenging animals that ate whatever was left behind. Even the towering Ferris wheel that had once been the highlight of my every trip stood deteriorated, with the wheel looking like it could fall off the rickety hinges at any moment. It was a shame to see the source of so many fond memories in such a state, but I couldn't help but feel just a little happy that I was able to return to see it one last time. I took out my phone to take some pictures as a keepsake. I walked around the theme park taking pictures of all the attractions I used to love as a kid. The slingshot ride that was made to look like a heart-shaped guillotine, the water ride based on the time that Alice cried enough tears to cause a flood, and even a winding hedge maze decorated with the now long-dead roses that was supposed to resemble the Queen of Hearts' garden. I got a little lost in the last one. I must have passed the same crumbling statue of the Queen of Hearts at least 3 times. Even when covered in bird shit, she still manages to look like a pompous prick. By the time I managed to find my way out of the maze, night was already beginning to fall. I got ready to leave the place before it got too dangerous to walk outside alone. But as soon as I took a step beyond the maze entrance, I heard something that stopped me in my tracks. Psst, hissed a soft voice somewhere behind me. It sounded like the voice of a child. Startled, I spun around to see what it was. Standing with her face half hidden behind a hedge wall was a pale little blonde girl in a tattered-looking blue dress. She stared at me with a pleading eye, but didn't utter a word as I stood there dumbfounded by her presence. Hey," I said, once I got over the initial surprise. "What are you doing here?" The little girl didn't reply. She just continued to stare at me with that glassy blue eye that seemed to see through my soul. I was a little creeped out, to be honest, but I wasn't about to abandon her there in the ruins. "Hey, sweetie, are you lost?" I asked. "Do you know where your parents are?" She didn't reply. She just turned away and ran off behind the hedge wall. "Wait!" I called out after her. It took me a long time to figure out the hedge maze myself. I didn't want her to get lost in it as well, so I ran after her. I turned the corner just in time to see the blue hem of her dress disappear behind the left hedge wall corner. I ran after her, my footsteps echoing throughout the otherwise silent ruins like banging drums. Each time I turned a corner to find her, I'd only catch a glimpse of her trailing dress, telling me which direction she went in the maze. It was almost as if she was doing it on purpose. Finally, I followed her to the wide open center of the maze, where there were no corners for her to hide behind. She stood stock still in front of the Queen of Hearts statue, with her back to me. It was the same Queen of Hearts statue I'd accidentally passed several times trying to get out. You're not gonna run away again, are you? I said between heavy pants, though the little girl didn't seem tired at all. Please just stay there. I'll call the police. They'll make sure you're safe, okay? I promise. The little girl shook her head, her face still turned away from me. It's too late for that, said the little girl, in the most sorrowful voice I'd ever heard. Before I could ask what she meant, the girl turned around to look at me. For the first time, I was able to fully see her face. It made me immediately wish I hadn't. The left half of her face had been completely torn open. I could see her cracked white skull peering through the bloody gash in her flesh, and her eye was hung from its socket, dangling over her ghostly pale cheeks like a macabre pendulum. I would have screamed had the shock of it all not caused my body to freeze in fear. Without another word, the little girl turned her back to me again and sunk into the dirt in front of the Queen of Hearts statue. It was then that I noticed that the dirt looked like it'd been disturbed. There was a small mound of dirt no bigger than a basketball, hidden by the overgrown grass that surrounded it. I managed to compose myself enough to approach it and examine it closer. Sticking out of the dirt was what looked like a human finger bone, small enough to belong to a child. I immediately called the police. Naturally, they asked me what I was doing in the ruined amusement park in the first place, and detained me for a few days while they investigated the girl's body buried under the Queen of Hearts statue. Thankfully, I was able to get off on minor trespassing charges after it became clear she'd been rotting there for at least 5 years. I don't know if the police will ever find out who put her there. I don't think even she knew herself. I just hope her spirit can finally find peace now, after being trapped in that park for so long. I traveled to find myself after college. It's a tale as old as time. College student graduates with a degree that he has no idea what to actually do with it, and wanders the country by himself in an old car he bought on eBay, hoping that he'll find some profound meaning to life at a pit stop somewhere. For 1 entire year after graduating, I went on a cross-country road trip going nowhere in particular. I often stopped by small towns and took part in whatever obscure local traditions it had. Pie baking contests, annual dance festivals, weird delicacies anyone else in America would consider disgusting, that sort of thing. Though they were all from the same country, it was interesting to see how different they all were from one another. I enjoyed my time stopping by them, even if I had to do odd jobs every now and then when my savings wouldn't cut it. One day on my self-realizing road trip, I came across a town that would change my life forever. It started out with a rusty old sign behind the road in the middle of nowhere. I would have missed it had I not been driving slower than usual to take in the sight of the vast expanses of wild grass to the either side of me. I parked right beside the sign and had to squint to read what it said through the brown rust that had gathered on it. It read, Rory, 100 miles, accompanied by an arrow curving left. I assumed that Rory must be a small town, and I started to look forward to learning some new local customs. I continued to drive down the long road, keeping an eye out for a left turn. Eventually, I came across a small dirt path branching off the main concrete road into a dense forest. Vegetation had grown over the path, but I could tell that just below the foliage was a smooth paved surface that might have once been used by people. I probably would have missed it entirely had I not been looking for it. The town must have been happy in its isolation to leave the path, and it's so hard to find. I turned the car onto the overgrown path and into the forest. Shadows casted by the tall trees above engulfed my vehicle. Only the faint spots of sunlight from the thicket lit my path up enough for me to not accidentally drive into a tree. After about an hour or so of driving over crunchy leaves, I finally reached the end of the path. In front of me was a small town with short, boxy buildings flanking either side of its roads. On the surface, it looked like all the other towns I'd visited since starting my trip, and yet, something about it felt off as I drove through it. I quickly realized what it was. The place was way too quiet. Usually when I rolled into a new small town, I'd at least get a look or two from a local wondering what the banged up car was doing in their town. But here, there wasn't even anybody outside doing anything, and I couldn't see anyone in the buildings through the windows either. At that moment, I knew I'd either stumbled into a town full of introverts or an abandoned one. I held out hope that it might just be a quiet day for the town, and drove to a building with a hotel sign in front of it. My car was the only one in the eerily empty parking lot. I pushed open the door to the little hotel. Like the rest of the town, there was no one to be found. The receptionist desk sat empty, and nobody came when I rang the bell on it. I knew at that point that the town must have been abandoned by its residents, though for what reason I still couldn't tell. After only a moment's hesitation, I swiped a key from the key rack behind the receptionist's desk and went to the room it was for. While I didn't relish the thought of squatting in an unoccupied building, I was itching for a comfortable bed to lie on after spending the past few nights in my car. The door to the hotel room creaked open with a loud squeak. I looked inside hoping to find a bed to rest on for the night. Although the room seemed well kept enough, I knew I wasn't going to be sleeping on the bed anytime soon when I saw it. Some sort of red mold was staining the white sheets of the bed, and the smell was unbearable too, like roadkill that had been left to rot. I gagged and closed the door before going back to the front desk to get a key for a different room to sleep in. But when I did, I was met with the same exact problem in the new room. The same pungent red mold that had covered the sheets of the first room was on the cushioned chair of the new room I picked. The smell was also just as terrible, and once again, I went back to the front desk to get the key for a different room. I found the same red mold in every single room I entered in the hotel, sometimes on the chairs and sofas, most of the time on the beds. I was about to give up after checking the 10th room when something on the moldy bed caught my eye, something that glinted in the golden sunlight that shone past the closed curtains. Holding my breath, I approached the bed to see what it was. My eyes widened when I saw a gold diamond ring on top of the red mold. My body moved before I could think twice. I tried to pick up the ring, no longer caring whether I touched the mold or not. The moment my fingertip touched the red mold, I felt a burning pain shoot through it and into my arm. I let go of the ring and took a step back. I suddenly didn't want the ring or to stay in the town anymore. I ran out of the hotel and back into my car. I grabbed the first aid kit I kept in the glove compartment and poured rubbing alcohol over where I'd touched the mold. The moment the alcohol touched my skin, a searing pain erupted in my fingertip. Upon closer inspection, I could see that my fingertip had developed a bloody blister that bulged out of my skin like a bulbous water balloon. I gently poked at it with my other hand, and the blister instantly burst at the slight pressure. The blood from the blister splattered all over my hands. I felt a burning sensation whenever the blood touched my skin. I scrambled to wipe them off with a towel, but realized with horror that they wouldn't come off. The blood had permanently seeped into my skin, turning into reddish sores that looked eerily similar to the red mold I encountered in the hotel. It's been a week since then. I'm still in the town and the sores have spread. Every day I can feel the sores that now cover my arms, eating away at my flesh. My arms are little more than skin and bones now. I'm sure that it'll soon eat at my bones in time as well. I felt a burning sensation whenever the blood touched my skin. I scrambled to wipe them off with a towel, but realized with horror that they wouldn't come off. As I return to the road in search for help, I pray that I have not accidentally doomed the rest of the world to the same fate as that abandoned town.